Hey everybody, and welcome back to Joygasm, a video game and movie podcast. I'm Russ, and it's Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, in episode 327 today, November 1st, 2023. We're going to be going right into our topic of the day, which is Janet Jackson documentary. This documentary came out last year, unbeknownst to me. And it has been quite the viewing experience. I personally am a very big Janet Jackson fan. And I thought it would be fun in this instance to be able to kind of break this up into two parts. The first part is I'd love to be able to share with all of you my history in terms of how I got to hear Janet's music and follow her as an artist and some funny stories along the way, and then pivot from that and go into what I thought of the actual documentary. And before we actually dive in, I just want to give a happy birthday to Randy, who I believe celebrated his birthday on October 29th. So happy birthday to you, good sir. So where do we begin on this crazy magic carpet ride? I think I want to talk about when I first heard Janet's music. This takes place back in 1987. And I, at the time, was 8 years old. So I was just this little tyke. I was this kid. And at the time, I was having fun with a tape recorder. I was learning how to actually put a cassette tape into a tape recorder, press record different kind of ambient sounds, or maybe do something silly with my voice or whatever. And I also learned how to do this with my father's stereo. And so I would love to listen to the radio, and I would have a blank cassette tape ready to record certain songs that would come on that I was interested in. Janet was definitely one of those. Back then, her Control album had just released, and there were songs such as Nasty Boys that would come on the radio. Now, at the time, I didn't know who Janet was. All I knew was the song would come on, and I really, really enjoyed the music. In fact, I was having fun. I remember at one point, the Nasty Boys song would come on, and you get to that kind of shouting back and forth with, like, you know, who's eating that nasty fruit, right? And then, you know, you hear the male chorus say Nasty Boys. And I remember having fun with the recording level where, like, she'd be yelling out a question, and I'd turn that up, and then I'd turn it back down, and then when they would reply Nasty Boys, I'd turn it up again. So that was kind of my first experience with Janet's music. Fast forward to a couple of years later, 1989, and this is when Janet has released her Rhythm Nation album. And I remember being at my cousin's house in Los Gatos, California, and my cousin Rachel had the album, and she had it playing, and the song that she was playing was Black Cat. I had never heard it up until that point, and I was floored. I was like, who is this? This sounds awesome. And she showed me the cassette tape of Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation, and it was the coolest thing. Like, I was looking at it, I was like, wow, who's she? I've never seen her before. And shortly thereafter, I ended up buying the album and loved it. I loved every track that was on that album. There was just so much to say. There was so much depth. And there was also a lot of kind of a sense of joy in a lot of her songs. You know, you have Miss You Much, you know, you have Escapade, Love Will Never Do Without You. You have a lot of these songs that really resonated with me, as I know it's resonated with countless fans. And that was something that, like, I remember dancing in my family room. I remember just visualizing how the different types of dance numbers would come about. And at the time, I didn't have, my family didn't have cable. We lived kind of out in the countryside. And my dad was one of those people who, like, you know, wasn't a big TV person. And so we didn't have access to, like, MTV or any other types of channels like that where we could actually watch these music videos go on. Fast forward from that to 1993, and the Janet album comes out. This album is probably my favorite out of her entire catalog, which is not an easy thing for me to come to a actual decision on, because there are so many albums and so many songs that are phenomenal. But it was interesting for me because that particular album had a number of stories with it that was really funny to think about. I'm going to share it. You know, I brought my travel suitcase of memories. I'm going to unzip it for you. I'm just, you know, unpack all this stuff. You know, I got lots of stuff to talk about. But you know, and actually I'm going to pause right there because I realize I'm forgetting a couple of things. Well, no, I'm not going to tease you like that. Okay, I'll go into it. I'll talk about it. So with Janet, as we all know, you know, like the Janet album was much more sensual. It had a lot more of an intimacy to a lot of the tracks and that sort of thing. We were definitely seeing more of a sexy side of Janet in this particular album. So, gosh, there are some funny stories. I grew up in a conservative family, and so everybody enjoyed listening to Janet and that sort of thing. But it was so funny because when I was looking at that particular, or when I was listening, to that particular album, there was always, I think it was track number 10, which was Throb. And I remember making a mental note to myself, because at the time I was about 14 years old. And so I would play the Janet CD in the family room of the house. You know, my mom's doing her thing, my dad's doing his thing, whatever, my brother's running around, whatever. And I remember, like, when it got to like close to the end of track number 8, I would try to make it a point to always be next to the CD player to, like, just, you know, skip over 9 and 10 and go right to 11. And there were a couple of instances where, like, you know, I was enjoying the music and I was distracted by whatever fancies I was into at the time. And there would be times where, like, you'd hear the "Go on, girl, Miss Janet," and then, like, it would begin with number 10. It was so funny. Like, there'd be times my mom would be in the kitchen. Oh, and I would just be sprinting. I would sprint over to the stereo systems to skip over that track. And she never, at the time, she was just like, why are you running over to the stereo so fast? What's going on? And it was just so hilarious how I was just like, oh my gosh, if they hear this track, they're going to tell me to like, you know, toss the CD or whatever. So there was that whole thing. In addition to that, there are other stories too with this where, so, we would play the Janet CD in the car, and my dad really liked the song "If." And what was so funny was, like, there was one day where, like, he came to me and he's like, "Hey, can I borrow your CD?" And I'm standing there like, sure. Well, why do you want to borrow my CD for? You never asked to borrow any of my other CDs. And, well, sure enough, the song "If," as well as other songs, were played very loudly in my parents' bedroom with both my mother and my father in that bedroom. So, yeah, it didn't take too long to realize what the heck was going on up there. And he had my CD for a while. It was like months. I had to ask him for it back. I was just like, I haven't seen my CD in a while. Can I, I don't know, play it myself sometime or whatever? And it was just the funniest things. I remember finally, like, he relinquished me my CD. It was like, he's like, "Oh, yeah, here you go, son. Thanks. Thank you." And I'm just like, "Yeah, that's my Janet CD. Yeah, you're welcome, Pops. That's good. That's good." Yeah, those were the fun days when, like, my brother and I would be having cereal in the mornings, and then, it's that instance where, like, your parents, like, all of a sudden come downstairs or they come into the kitchen and they're a little too happy. You're just like, why are you bouncing around like Richard Simmons? You you're like Mr. Stoic, you know, like you're always like half eye shut, you know, like just bumping into things. And, you know, instead it's like dad's just like, oh, how's it going? Hey, good to see you. And just like way too happy. And then like your mom comes in and gives you a kiss on the head. Like, oh, good morning. I'm like, too soon. Too fresh. And so Steve and I would be talking about later, like, that's just, yeah, good for them. You know, it's the funniest thing too, because on the one hand, it's like, I'm proud of my dad because it's like, oh, he has good taste in music, you know, and this is the kind of music like, hey, okay, you know, he's having some quality time with my mom. All right, that's good. But at the same time, I'm just like, it's my CD. It's like, okay. All right. But anyway, makes for a funny story. I want to pause really quickly, though, before I go any farther. And actually, I'm looking at my notes right here. I want to also talk about how I just decided to do this as an episode for Joygasm. So recently, I would say just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I started kind of reminiscing about the just the overall general sound of the music from the late 80s. It was like, you know, from 87 to 89. I think that they had even categorized it as New Jack Swing, if I remember correctly. I believe that's what it was. But I found myself being nostalgic and just being like, you know, there was something about that time period that I absolutely loved about music. And you heard it with Paula Abdul, you heard it with Janet, you heard it with Madonna. Like, you had all these different artists at the time, Whitney Houston. And there was just this kind of generalized sound that I think the music industry as a whole was infatuated with. And they were just kind of moving in that direction for a few years. And so what was interesting was I was talking to some of my friends who are audio engineers over at the video game studio that I work at. And we started talking about like the different types of equipment and like, you know, oh, they probably use an 808 and they probably use, you know, kind of having that discussion. And then after that, I started to look up Paula Abdul's songs because I realized that in my library of music, I've never purchased any of her tracks. And so I started purchasing various classics that I love of hers, as well as like the remixes. Love a lot of the remixes that were done. And as I was doing that, then I realized, oh my goodness, like, I wonder if Janet has any kind of remixes based off different songs like Miss You Much or Escapade, Love Will Never Do Without You, all those types of tracks. And sure enough, they were there as well. And I was having a blast. Like, it was so nice to be able to go back through and revisit just track after track and being transported immediately back to certain memories or time periods based on what that music had to offer. So super, super cool. And somehow, some way, I don't know if it was my phone that was like secretly listening in and like the algorithm all of a sudden suggested the documentary, but somehow it popped up and I was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that Janet had done a documentary. In fact, you know, what's interesting is that I had lost track of what Janet has been up to since about 2012. Because at that time I had moved, I had gotten married, I had become a father, we had finally bought a house, like all these like life things that were going on. And it was crazy to think about because you just get so wrapped up in what's going on day to day, you know, just day to day responsibilities, day to day life, all that kind of stuff, that you suddenly, you know, I look back and I'm like, oh wow, like there's a period of time there. There's like, you know, 10, 11 years that I have no idea what has been going on. And so it was cool. I was able to also discover that she had an album that she released in 2015. I had no idea she released an album in 2015, but she did. It was called Unbreakable. Absolutely adore that first track. It is just, I mean, the smile on my face I was just grinning ear to ear and kind of just swaying to the music. I mean, I absolutely loved what she did with that first track. And I felt like it was a bit fortuitous, honestly, when I think about how, in the track, there comes a point where she starts monologuing and she says, hi, it's been a while. And I'm like, you know what?
Been a while.
It has been a while in my case. Yes. Thank you. Good to see you too.
Lots to talk
Yeah,
about.
figuratively speaking. But no, I found myself very amused by that, just because of the fact that I had lost touch with like all the work that she had been up to for over a decade. So that's where the documentary comes in. And, if I were to, before I dive into the documentary, the other albums that had come out after Janet, like Velvet Rope was also fantastic. I really enjoyed Demita Joe. There were a lot of tracks on there that I enjoyed, as well as All For You. Just so much talent, and a lot of stuff that I'll dive into. I think I'll sprinkle it in as we go along here. But let's see here. I have lots of notes. I apologize. Let's see. So, when I hear her music, going back to I heard her 2015 album, and then I realized too, there was a Janet YO. Had no idea there was an album like that as well. I ended up going through all of her albums again, because I really hadn't done that in such a long time. Let me tell you something. There are very few things that I can think of that are a pleasure to do than to go through rediscovering one of your favorite artists. It is so cool. I sat down, I went through all of Rhythm Nation, I went through all of Janet, all of Velvet Rope, all of All For You, Demita Joe. Demita Joe, I think, Discipline was the last album that I was aware of at the time before all of a sudden I had this big old hiatus. But I'm floored, and I'll talk more about Jimmy and Terry in a minute, but this music is ageless. You put it in and you're just like, my goodness, like everything about this is top notch. It's so good. And the memories that, I mentioned earlier, that come flooding back are really wonderful. It's crazy. But for me, up until the point of this documentary, I really had no context. The only thing I did was I enjoyed her music. I enjoyed her albums, but I never really saw any of her interviews. I never really saw, any of the music videos, that sort of thing. And so with the documentary, that really helped to bring a lot of that context back into play. And then even after I watched the documentary, I was playing catch up. I was watching various music videos. I was looking at different types of interviews that she had on talk shows like Oprah or Larry King, or various types of MTV interviews, or even when she went to Europe and had interviews there. There was just so much that I never saw. And so it's here it is, 2023, the end of 2023. And I'm playing this massive catch up game, but I find it to be a nice byproduct of the documentary itself. Okay. So I feel like I've gotten a really good, high level explanation of where I am with regards to her music. So let's go into the actual documentary itself. This documentary is, first of all, it's great. It's a really fascinating look into the life of Janet Jackson. And there was a lot to chew on, a lot to process. And the first thing, I wrote down notes as I was watching the overall documentary. One of the characteristics of Janet that I have always appreciated is how genuine she is. she has never shied away from taking raw inventory of who she is as a person, who she is as a woman, and also what it is that she is wanting to set out to do. And you see this in the documentary from the very start, where she definitely has that grit. She has that drive. And you watch as she navigates these waters to be able to forge her own destiny, forge her own career path, her own success. And it's been very fascinating to really be a sponge and soak in like the things that she had to say, not only, in like present day, like when the folks are interviewing her, but also too, every time you see her be interviewed by a talk show host or, she's interacting with the public or whatever, there's a lot going on in her face. The facial expressions, what is not said is very telling. And it's something that it reinforces the notion that there's a lot going on mentally and emotionally with her, that, she's always said how she's a very private person, and she is, especially when you compare her to many other celebrities. But it is interesting to kind of see, there may be a question that causes a certain type of facial expression or some kind of memory that triggers something or what have you, and she has talked about how she tends to internalize a lot of things. And I totally understand. I understand where she comes from with that. But throughout the documentary, that was one of the things that really stood out to me as a highlight. Another big highlight for me is Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. I'm familiar with their names because I would always look at all the cassette tape or CD credits on there, and their names were always listed. But I've never met them. I have never seen them be interviewed before. And so this was a treat to be able to sit down and watch as these gentlemen were giving a recount of what all transpired during this whole journey of working with Janet. And they play and have played such a significant role in the success of her music, and this is really neat. And for someone like myself, who is also a creative, when you are creating something, it is a challenge. It's something that you have an inkling of at first. You're not exactly sure like how the whole thing will end up being, but you have to have faith. You have to actually, take that first step. And part of that process is when you can find other creatives who complement your style, who complement who you are, who help support and foster this environment of being able to challenge each other in a very healthy way. It's not a toxic environment, but it's definitely something that when you find, and that can be kind of difficult. You can find certain folks that perhaps various aspects will in fact jive, but then maybe perhaps certain personality traits or approaches to whatever the thing is that you're trying to make may not be aligned. This is just a crazy example of like how Janet seeked out Jimmy and Terry, who I believe, if I remember correctly, were playing with Morris Day because they were part of the time. And being able to start that professional journey and go into it. I mean, I'm thinking about like various songs that they have done with Janet's lyrics. And it's crazy to me, like how they can take what Janet has written down, what she has actually manifested and put down and make something very personal. And somehow these two guys are able to compose these tracks that really enhance. They enhance and they weave around the lyrics of what Janet has made. What's super cool about that, like if I put in, say, the Janet album and I'm listening to it, So her voice, you know, she has such a lovely, soothing voice. You know, like I'm a huge fan of when she croons and like has different ways of being able to harmonize with her vocals. And it's done so in a way that almost kind of like it envelopes the listener. You know, it's almost like her voice is kind of giving you a hug in a way. And with Jimmy and Terry working the music side of things, it's like there's so much that's there. I'm such a huge fan of their work, and looking at and listening to the sound art that they make. And it doesn't matter which track it is, but somehow they were able to tap into the emotionality of what it was that Janet was conveying within those lyrics, and then bring to life like this whole entire song. I don't know, like that partnership, that professional partnership that they have is truly special. And it has paid off in dividends, not only monetarily speaking, but also too, in terms of creating art. And you look at that and, you know, as a consumer, as a fan, as a listener, and you're just like, wow, like I am so grateful that we have folks like them who have this passion in music, who can really just come together. And again, like when you watch the documentary, it's not like they instantly had solutions to every type of song that they wanted to make. And there were moments of frustration. There were moments of like not being able to hit the right sound. And I have such respect to both Jimmy and Terry, as well as Janet, for being able to go through all this stuff. You know, another aspect, or I should say another component that I personally feel is a major contributor to Janet's success are the people, who worked more on her brand identity, is what I'll call it. Excuse me, I'm a little gassy. I had to get that burp out. Anyway, I had to write it down because I want to make sure I got the name right. But Wayne Scott Lukas is, or I should say, I'm not sure if he still is, but he has been Janet's wardrobe stylist for many of her various types of music videos. And again, like when I'm thinking of like the entire package, he really put together different types of uniforms and outfits that resonate, that just they anytime someone looks at it, once again, you're instantly transported to like how you felt at that time when you saw like that particular music video. If you look at like, you know, That's the Way Love Goes, for instance, and she has that particular outfit on with like the kind of the Native American choker on. People talk about this stuff all the time. And again, it is a major part of who she is, how she markets herself, that I love that. I have always been such a big fan of kind of being able to kind of peek behind the curtain, right? Like I love the presentation. I love the show. I love the emotional experience, but I also love as a fellow creative, I want to see like how they went through, being able to create what I find to be so captivating in the first place. And this gentleman is one of those folks who, I mean, time and time again, we see him going through it and working with Janet to figure out, and Janet definitely had a say as to like, you know, what she thought worked, what she thought didn't work, that sort of thing. And it was crazy to watch those parts of the documentary, be able to like get some insight from him in terms of what Janet was going through at different parts of her career and life. But also too, looking at like just what is added to that. Another person who I really admire and appreciate her work, her name is also Janet. I don't know how to pronounce her last name though, so I apologize if I butcher this, but I'm going to go on a limb and say Zeitoun, Janet Zeitoun. I don't know if I'm totally saying that wrong. I apologize if I am, but anyway, she was Janet's hairstylist, and she was the hairstylist for a very long time. Again, going back, especially like during the late 80s, early 90s, right in there were multiple hairstyles that were very signature of Janet. And again, just floored. I mean, like she was just gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. And these people who she hired were the ones who really just, they enhanced her features, they enhanced her look. They were able to all work together. Once again, have that collaboration where, okay, we know we want to have a specific type of theme or character that we want to be able to explore and push and that sort of thing. These people are part of the overall package that is Janet, at least when it comes to public facing product and that sort of thing. So I feel compelled to be able to give each of them kudos because they really, I mean, I loved everything that they did. Like just spot on, fantastic work. There's if I were to switch gears a little bit, there is a moment in the documentary that is one of my absolute favorites. And that is where Janet is hanging out with her brother, Randy, eating cereal. Oh my gosh. Like, it was hilarious because the mic was like picking up every time she would crunch. And Randy's over there like, is that good? Does that taste good? And she's like, it's noisy. Like, I'm so happy that they put that in because that is such a sibling thing to do. And it's just fun. That's the thing is like Janet has a very down to earth vibe about herself where she's no nonsense. She obviously likes to have fun and that sort of thing, but those little instances are just gold. I'm sorry, but like, I love that. Like that shows the real side of her. And I don't know. I just appreciate that. But, anyway, I'm trying to play catch up here on my notes. There was another thing I wanted to mention. If I were to pause where I'm at with the documentary, go and rewind back to 1993 when I was listening to the Janet album. I totally forgot about this particular anecdote, but I remember her album came out in May, and then the Rolling Stone the Rolling Stone cover came out in, I believe, September of 1993. Now, that was the only cover that I ever bought from Rolling Stone. And I mean, once again, I remember just totally being fascinated, like wanting to learn about what Janet had to say, read the article, that sort of thing. What's interesting is that I've been talking about how there are various types of songs that can bring back certain memories or experiences. The same thing is like with smells. Like, there are times where like, if you walk into a room and you smell something that you haven't smelled in a long time, it's like, whoa, like you might randomly remember something from when you were like 11 years old or when you were like 15 or whatever. What's one of the smells that I will never forget was in the Rolling Stone magazine. I'm just digesting all of this interview that's going on through the pages. And this is nothing new, but like, in magazines like Rolling Stone, they'll have those little like tear out samples of like perfume or cologne, right? I want to say, I could be wrong on this, but I want to say maybe it was Calvin Klein. Maybe. I can't remember exactly what it was. But the point I'm making is, as I'm reading this interview in Rolling Stone, the smell of the cologne was just kind of subtly wafting out of the pages and just, I don't know, it was the weirdest thing, but I, ever since then, have made a connection of that smell to the interview with Janet in the magazine itself. It was weird. It was like, but in a very cool way. It was like one of those things where like you're reading and whatnot, and like, you have this smell coming out. It's almost like this perfume kind of smell. I have half a mind to think that was intentional by the marketing department. I'll bet you they probably said, yeah, we'll put that little sample right there. And the interview is just over here. And I'm sure there was a method to the madness on that one now that I'm thinking about it. And if that's true, well done. well done, because woo, I remember that. And I remember just, it sounds corny, but it enhanced the reading experience. It was the weirdest thing. Anyway, going back, I just had to, that memory popped in my mind, and I was like, ooh, I need to say that before it just kind of, decides to leave my brain. Getting back to the documentary, another component to Janet that I was not aware of really at all until I watched this, was her love life. And so that was crazy to be able to check out and listen to and hear what Janet had to say, hear what her friends who were being interviewed on the documentary had to say about that. Renee was this person who I had, at the very most, I had fleetingly heard his name, just barely. Like, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he looked like, nothing. And so this part was also very interesting for me to be able to sit back and learn about, where they met, they started working together, they had a secret marriage. And the documentary goes into more detail about that. But what was fascinating was how much of a unit they were in terms of the actual professional career side of things. Excuse me. And so that part of it too, it was fascinating to be able to see how they work together and how he really was a big part of Janet's career in terms of Rhythm Nation, Janet, and Velvet Rope. How, like, you had this like in fairly quick succession, you had these albums come out, once every, say, 3 to 4 years ish, somewhere around there. And it was neat to be able to see how these songs that I have been enjoying and that we've all been enjoying for decades now, to be able to understand some of where the inspiration came from with what she was singing about in various songs, as well as kind of this juggernaut that they were building to be Janet in terms of a performer. And to see like how there were various types of strategies involved with how how should this music video look like? What should the overall set design be like? Who should we get? And to see how they very much were in sync with each other, and there was a trust that was there, that sort of thing. And then be able to learn about how, the very thing that really was successful for them ended up sounding like that was kind of the catalyst for their undoing and their eventual divorce. So this documentary has a bunch of that. And it's very fascinating to be able to look at that as well. Going into the documentary further, it's interesting to be able to see various types of events that have transpired while I have been alive. And I think this is an introspective realization where Janet is one of those celebrities that has, she's been alive a bit longer than I have. And so as a result, it's like, I've always known her. I've know her, but like in terms of being born all the way up until present day, like I have always known she's existed. I have celebrated her catalog. I've celebrated her talent, been a big fan, that sort of thing. And so those types of celebrities, they become kind of like a part of your family in a way. And so it was interesting how, of course, they went down the road of doing the Scream video. That's crazy. That came out, I want to say, in 1995. And I remember precisely where I was. I was over in Sonoma, and I was hanging out with a buddy of mine, and we were talking and analyzing the music video. We thought it was just amazing. And like, especially the actual collaboration between Michael and Janet, like just seeing these two powerhouses come together. It was just a brilliant idea. And not only that, but like seeing the unique talent that each one of them brought to, it was just amazing. And I hadn't seen it in a long time, hadn't heard the song. The song is great. you know, if I think about some of the other types of things that ended up occurring, such as like the Super Bowl event, like I had honestly, it kind of like just slipped my mind. I mean, again, like, you know, as I'm watching, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I think that happened in like 2004. So there are these different things that, of course, they are going to cover. But I will say that it is very nice to be able to get Janet's account of what was going on from her perspective, how she has moved on from those different types of events, and you know, how she's become more wise as a result from these personal experiences, which we all have. You know, in our own lives, we all make mistakes. We all have different types of events that transpire that we totally did not mean to have happen, but they did. And, you know, you just got to kind of, okay, dust yourself off, figure out what you got to do, and then move on from there. But, you know, again, it goes back to how much of a genuine person that I think Janet really is. There was actually, you know, a section of the documentary that talked about her acting when it came to Poetic Justice. I have never seen that movie until after I watched the documentary, and I was like, oh my goodness, I totally forgot to watch that movie. So I watched it, and it was good. It was definitely good. And it was fun too, how the latter half of the movie kind of takes place more in the Bay Area, where I'm from. So that was like, oh wow, yeah, I recognize that ocean. I recognize those streets. So that was also something that was really cool. And I think that's obviously, I mean, it's no surprise. Like, you know, you start watching a documentary like this and then you're reminded of all these things, you want to revisit them or maybe visit them for the first time. And so it's just been an absolute pleasure for someone like myself to be able to do just that. Another aspect of this that I think has been fun, you know, I mentioned earlier how, like, after I watched the documentary, I started going on YouTube and Twitter and, you know, social media, that sort of thing, and just starting to play catch up with various types of interviews that she's had. And there was one in particular. So in my family, we were big Jay Leno fans. And I mean, we watched Dave Letterman too, but like Jay was definitely like, that was our cup of tea. Like we really loved Jay Leno and Kevin Eubanks. And there was one episode, had no idea. I want to say it was probably around like 2001. I'm not exactly sure. It was either 2000, it was between 2001 to 2004, somewhere around there. Anyway, he has Janet on doing an interview. And at one point, they kiss. And it was the funniest little setup. And I was like, oh yeah, they're just going to tease and whatever, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden she was totally down. Like she just like leaned over and he went for it too. And it was just like.
Oh, let me ask you something personal so you can go, no, I don't want to talk about that. Hey, you have a boyfriend now? Mm-hmm. Now he's the guy in your video, right? At the end of the video?
Yes.
And you give him a kiss?
Yes.
Right.
But why?
No, what I want to know is when your boyfriend is in a video with you,
yes,
is it easier to kiss your boyfriend in a video, or is it easier, like, if it's an actor and, you know, you do the moves and you do the kiss? I mean, are you more nervous? Is it weirder? Which is?
I think, well, it's actually easier to kiss my boyfriend, but it was just a little peck. But you know, I've kissed a few guys on screen before, and there have been times when it's been difficult and times when it was easy. It was very easy kissing Tupac, actually, for Poetic Justice. Yeah.
Huh? And when is it difficult? If it's like me? That would be difficult.
Why would that be difficult?
I don't know. We should try it. Kev will tell you all about it after You know, that was great. You're very good at that. You're very good at that.
You've got lipstick.
I do. And it's going to stay there.
Well, aren't you married?
I am married. That's right. Thank you for bringing me back to reality. See, that's the great thing about this show. My wife can see me flirt directly, and this is as far as it goes.
This nice little peck, and it was like, first of all, I was super jealous. I was like, what the heck? And then secondly, I was like, that was awesome. Like that is, to me, like that was such a memorable moment. And of course, Jay looking at Kevin and like giving him the air high five. And he's like, tell you about it after the show and that sort of thing. Oh man, that has become probably one of my favorite Janet Jackson moments, is her playfulness and willingness to just act on a spontaneous moment like that. And for Jay to do the same exact thing and everything, I just love it. And like she even said afterwards, like, aren't you married? And he's like, I am. Thank you for bringing me back to reality. Like the whole thing was just this fun banter. Super, super fun. And I realize how ridiculous I sound because I'm sure many of you have probably already seen things like this. They're like, yeah, Russ, like, we saw that years ago. But I'm just here to tell you that, hey, better late than never, I say. I'm a late bloomer. I accept that. I admit to it. It's fine. And honestly, it's a bit of a treat. I think it's a bit of a treat in the sense that, because I was not aware of these things and whatnot, and now I'm watching the documentary and I feel like I'm having quality time with Miss Jackson, being able to like see all these different interviews and whatnot. Yeah, I think I've touched on just about everything that, like, I don't want to spoil the documentary for you guys, but I can say that I definitely recommend this documentary. It was very, very fun to be able to get back in touch with Miss Jackson and just be able to like I said, rediscover her work, get back in touch with who she is as a person, be able to celebrate where she is now, where like, she's a mom and I'm so happy for her, God bless her son, Issa. And I just really hope and pray for her to be able to have the necessary energy and support as a single mom. I could tell you as a fellow parent, you will never be more exhausted in your life, but you will also be never more in love than when you have a baby. And you can tell that she's just basking in that motherhood right now. And that's a truly wonderful thing. If I had to critique the documentary itself, I personally would love like a season 2. And I would like for it to actually focus more so on the process of her doing her thing. Like this documentary was a smorgasbord of, talking and examining her history, how she got into show business, how she wanted to originally go to college at Pepperdine and be able to, I think, go into business, be a business lawyer or something to that effect. And then realize how, due to her father really having control of her career at that point in time, pushing her more into acting and singing and seeing that kind of stuff, so we got all of that. We did get to see her come into her own, become an adult, become in control of her life, of her career, and then be able to, we did get some of the creative process. And I loved it. One of the things that I am thankful for with regards to Renee was that he did in fact record so much stuff going on just in their daily lives, whether they were at work or they were on vacation or whatever. And this has really paid off in dividends in terms of this documentary itself. And part of that is watching Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis working with Janet, having those moments where they weren't getting the sound they were looking for. Maybe they got a little frustrated at each other, but also, celebrating each other's success. All of that is very, very cool. For me as a fan, I would absolutely love if they were to do an encore, if they had like a season 2. And I'm assuming that there's still a treasure trove of footage that Renee took from the various videos. I don't know if Janet has access to that or what kind of the legalities are, but if she still has all that, as well as being able to continue interviewing Jimmy and Terry, as well as other folks who were a part of her creative team, that would just be fantastic. even if she were to do another tour, for instance, I know on social media they have like these short little clips with her and her dancers, and like they'll show little things, and that's all well and good. But I would like a more in-depth focus on the creative process. As I'm going back up through my notes, being able to see those conversations with Wayne, Scott, Lukas, and Janet going over like just different wardrobe decisions, hearing more of his methodology of like how he puts these outfits together, because that's not an easy thing to do. Talking to the hairstylist, talking to Gil, or like, we did get some of that in this particular documentary, but for me, I would absolutely love it. I would watch it. And I think many of us would as well, who are fans of hers. So anyway, that wraps up this episode of Joygasm. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed this podcast, I invite you to check out patreon.com/Joygasm, where you can enjoy exclusive perks and early access to the show. Not to mention, it will continue financially helping me do the podcast. Also, click on that subscribe button as well as that notification bell. That way you will not miss a single solitary episode of Joygasm that drops once a week, most of the time each week. And if you feel so inclined, you could do a search and join and follow me on your favorite social media platform of choice. Just do a search for @Joygasm TV, which is spelled Joygasm TV. Last but not least, you are more than welcome to join me on my streaming adventures on Twitch every Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. Central Time. I look forward to hanging out with all of you again next week.